The candles in Ashworth Hall had never burned brighter. 200 guests, the finest families in England, silk gowns, powdered shoulders, the smell of hothouse roses and expensive ambition. Everyone who mattered was here tonight, and everyone who mattered was watching. Cecilia stood at the edge of the grand staircase, her champagne untouched, her spine perfectly straight. She had worn the ivory gown on purpose, the one she had worn on her wedding day 3 years ago in this very house. She had let the seamstress take it in slightly at the waist. She was thinner now, everyone noticed, but the pearl buttons down the back were the same. Every single one. She had dressed carefully tonight. Because she had known, not suspected, known. Her husband's voice rose above the music, warm and commanding, the voice of a man entirely comfortable in his own skin. "Allow me to present the lady of Ashworth Hall, the woman who has brought light back to this house." Applause, genuine, delighted applause. Cecilia's eyes moved to the woman on her husband's arm. Violet Hartley, 24 years old, the daughter of a minor merchant from Bath. She was wearing a gown of deep emerald green, a color Cecilia herself had never worn because James had once told her it was common. Violet wore it magnificently. Her dark hair was piled high, her cheeks flushed with pleasure and champagne and the particular glow of a woman who believes she has already won. She smiled at the room like she owned it. She was standing in Cecilia's house, on Cecilia's staircase. And Cecilia's husband, James Arthur Whitmore, the Duke of Ashworth, had just introduced her to 200 people by Cecilia's title. The room went very quiet in the way that rooms do when something terrible has happened, and no one yet knows what to do about it. Every head turned. They were looking for Cecilia. They found her immediately. She was not difficult to find. She was the only person in the room who had not moved, had not gasped, had not reached for a neighbor's arm. She stood at the edge of the staircase with her champagne glass raised slightly, as though she had been about to take a sip and simply paused. She was smiling. Not the brittle smile of a woman holding herself together, not the frozen smile of shock. A real smile, small, composed, almost private, the smile of a woman who has just watched something happen exactly as she expected it to. Lady Harrington, standing 3 feet to her left, leaned close and whispered, "My dear, shall I call for your carriage?" Cecilia turned to her. Her eyes were perfectly clear. "Why would I leave?" she said. "This is my house." She took a sip of her champagne. And she did not take the ring off. The thing people would remember afterward, and they would talk about this evening for years, in drawing rooms from London to Bath, was not the Duke's announcement. It was not Violet Hartley's triumphant smile, or the collective sharp intake of breath from 200 well-bred guests. What they remembered was Cecilia's hands. Specifically, that ring. A duchess's ring was not a small thing. The Ashworth betrothal ring had been in the Duke's family for 4 generations, a oval ruby, deep as old wine, set in gold with 2 flanking diamonds. It was the kind of ring that entered a room before the woman wearing it. Everyone in English society knew it on sight. Cecilia had worn it every day for 3 years. She was wearing it now, and she showed no intention of removing it. This was somehow more unsettling than anything else she could have done. Had she wept, the room would have pitied her. Had she screamed, they would have whispered about her instability for years. Had she removed the ring and placed it quietly on the silver tray by the door, which was what several people privately expected her to do, a gesture of dignified surrender, they would have admired her tremendously and forgotten her within a month. She did none of these things. She moved through the room. She accepted a fresh glass of champagne from a footman who could not quite meet her eyes. She stopped to speak with old Lord Pemberton about his gout, with precisely the same attention she had given the subject at every dinner party for 3 years. She admired Lady Fitch's new brooch. She asked after the Harrington children by name, all four of them in age order. She was the perfect hostess. In her own home, while her husband's mistress stood 20 feet away, receiving congratulations. James found her in the East Corridor, near the portrait gallery, 20 minutes after his announcement. He had come to find her, she had expected that. He always came to explain himself. It was one of the things she had once found almost endearing about him in the early days, before she understood that his explanations were not apologies. They were performances. He was very handsome, James. She had never stopped noticing that. Tall, dark-haired, with the particular confidence of a man who had never once in his life been told he could not have what he wanted. He looked at her now with an expression she recognized. Concern layered carefully over irritation, with something else beneath it that she could not quite name. Not guilt. James did not experience guilt in any form she had ever been able to identify. Something more like unease. Cecilia. James. I had hoped to speak with you before. Before the announcement, she said pleasantly. Yes, I imagine that would have been the preferred order of events. He reached for her arm. She did not pull away, but she did not move toward him either. She simply looked at his hand on her sleeve with a mild, polite interest, as though it belonged to a stranger. I know this is not what you would have chosen, he said. But you and I have understood each other for some time now, I think. This arrangement, our arrangement, it has always been a matter of. James. He stopped. Cecilia looked up at him. In the candlelight from the portraits, she could see the moment he registered something in her face that he had not expected to find there. She watched him try to identify it. He was not a stupid man. That had always been the problem. You should go back to your guests, she said. Violet will be wondering where you are. She said the name without hesitation, without venom, without any particular emphasis at all. Just a name, as if it were ordinary. That, she knew, was what would stay with him. She turned back toward the main salon. Cecilia, his voice behind her had changed slightly, quieter. Why are you still wearing that ring? She paused, did not turn around. Because I haven't decided to take it off yet, she said. She walked back into the light and the noise and the 200 people who were pretending not to watch her, and she smiled at every single one of them. And her hand, the one with the ruby ring, rested perfectly still at her side. She was not ready for them to see her hands shake. But they wouldn't, she had practiced. Cecilia had not always been a woman who planned. There had been a time, she was 19, absurdly young, absurdly hopeful, when she had believed that a good marriage was a matter of character. That if a woman was patient, gracious, intelligent, and loyal, those qualities would be recognized, rewarded even. She had been patient for 3 years. She was done being patient. The document had come to her attention 14 months ago, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, when her father's old solicitor, Mr. Aldous Fenn, 71 years old, half-deaf in his left ear, and possessed of a memory like cold iron, had appeared at the servants' entrance of Ashworth Hall and asked, very quietly, to speak with her alone. She had received him in the small sitting room she used for correspondence, not the formal parlor, the small room with the low fire and the narrow window that looked out over the kitchen garden, the room where no one thought to listen at doors. Mr. Fenn had placed a leather folder on the table between them. Your father asked me to bring this to you, he said, when I judged the time had come. My father has been dead for 4 years, Cecilia said. Yes, said Mr. Fenn. He anticipated that it might take some time. She had read the document 3 times that afternoon, twice more that evening after Mr. Fenn had gone, with the fire burned low and a glass of her husband's best brandy. She had never drunk brandy before that night, open on the table beside her. Her father, it turned out, had been a more careful man than anyone had given him credit for. The marriage settlement between the Hartwell family and the Duke of Ashworth had been drawn up, as all such settlements were, to protect the financial interests of both parties. The Duke had received, upon marriage, the use of the Hartwell country estate in Gloucestershire, a property worth considerably more than its modest reputation suggested, owing to the coal deposits her father had quietly surveyed and never mentioned to anyone except his solicitor. He had also received the clearing of a substantial debt that James's own father had owed the Hartwell family for 11 years, a debt that had never been publicly acknowledged, and that James himself may or may not have known about. In exchange, Cecilia had received the title, the house, the ring, and one other thing. Clause 14, subsection 3, written in her father's solicitor's careful hand and witnessed by two men who were, Mr. Fenn confirmed, still living and still willing to testify. In the event that the Duke of Ashworth should publicly and demonstrably violate the dignity and standing of his wife, through open association with another woman conducted before witnesses of social standing, the Hartwell family's contributed properties and cleared debts shall revert entirely to the wife's sole possession and management, she being the injured party under English law as witnessed and agreed. 200 guests. The finest families in England. Her father, Cecilia thought, had always understood James better than she had. She had spent 14 months preparing, quietly, methodically, in the way she did everything, the way she managed the household accounts that James never looked at, the way she remembered every servant's name and every guest's preference and every small detail of a life that most people assumed ran itself. She had met with Mr. Fenn 4 times, always through intermediaries, always in the small sitting room. She had identified the witnesses she would need. She had made sure that the right people would be present tonight. She had not told James, not because she was cruel. She had examined that question honestly, lying awake in the bedroom she now slept in alone, and she did not believe she was acting from cruelty. She had not told him because she had given him 3 years of chances that he had not taken. She had been clear when she could be. She had been patient when clarity failed. He had chosen Violet Hartley anyway, chosen her openly, brazenly, with the particular confidence of a man who believed his wife would absorb whatever he gave her and remain, because what else would she do? He had underestimated her. Most people did. She had spent years allowing it. There was one thing that still snagged at her, even now, even tonight, with the plan in motion and the documents safe with Mr. Fenn and 2 witnesses already placed in the salon like careful chess pieces. She had loved James once. She was almost certain of it. Not the desperate, consuming love of novels. She was too practical for that and had known herself too well even at 19 to expect it. But something quieter and more real, a warmth, a willingness, a genuine belief that this man and she might build something worth having. He had been charming in the beginning, attentive even. There had been perhaps 4 months early in the marriage when she had thought, yes, this is going to be all right. Then his father had died. Then the money pressures had become visible. Then Violet Hartley had appeared at a house party in Surrey, wearing emerald green, laughing at everything James said. And James had looked at Violet the way he had never once looked at Cecilia. She had not wept about it. She had sat with it, the way you sit with a diagnosis, first the shock, then the strange, exhausted clarity that comes after. She had understood, with the calm of someone whose illusions have been removed rather than shattered, that she had 2 choices. She could remain as she was, the invisible duchess, the woman in the background, patient and dignified and slowly disappearing. Or she could become someone James had never thought to worry about. She had chosen the second. The evening was still in full motion when she returned to the salon. Violet was at the center of a small, glittering circle near the fireplace, her laugh carrying clearly across the room. She had, in the 30 minutes since the announcement, fully inhabited the role she had been given. She was touching the furniture as though it already belonged to her. She was directing a footman with the easy authority of a woman who has rehearsed this moment. Cecilia watched her for a moment from the doorway. Then her eyes moved to Violet's neck. The necklace was gold, with a small pendant, an oval of blue enamel, edged in seed pearls. Cecilia recognized it immediately, with the particular recognition that comes not from memory but from the body. Her hands went slightly cold. It had been her mother's. Not a piece from the Ashworth collection. Not something James had purchased or borrowed or technically owned. Her mother's necklace, which had come to Cecilia in a small velvet box the morning of her wedding, with a note in her mother's handwriting that said simply, "Wear this and I am with you." Cecilia had kept it in her jewelry case. She had not worn it tonight. She had been saving it for the right moment. James had given it to Violet. The room was very warm. The candles were very bright. Cecilia set down her champagne glass with great care, making sure it did not make a sound. All right, she thought, all right. She walked toward the fireplace. The small circle around Violet parted for her. People always parted for her. It was one of the unremarked privileges of being the actual Duchess. And she stopped directly in front of Violet Hartley and smiled at her with perfect, unhurried composure. "What a beautiful necklace," Cecilia said. Violet touched it reflexively, pleased. The Duke chose it himself, apparently. He has wonderful taste. He does, Cecilia agreed. My mother thought so too. She was wearing it when she sat for her portrait. The one in the East Corridor, if you haven't seen it yet. I think you'll find the resemblance to that necklace quite striking. The silence that followed was very small, very precise. Violet's smile did not falter. She was not a stupid woman. Cecilia had never thought she was, but something moved behind her eyes. Calculation. Reassessment. The two women looked at each other. "I hope you're enjoying the evening," Cecilia said pleasantly. And she moved away before Violet could speak, back through the parting crowd, back toward the edges of the room where she could breathe. Her hands, she noticed, had stopped shaking entirely. The mistake was not the necklace. The necklace had been James's mistake, careless, thoughtless, the act of a man who had stopped seeing his wife as a person with a history. Violet could not have known where it came from. Cecilia was willing, in the privacy of her own mind, to grant her that much. No, Violet's mistake came later in the evening, and it was entirely her own. It began with the seating arrangement. Dinner had been planned, Cecilia had planned it, as she planned everything in this house, down to the placement of the salt cellars and the rotation of the footmen, for 24 guests at the long table in the formal dining room. She had written the cards herself, 3 days ago, in her neat, unhurried hand. She knew exactly where everyone was meant to sit. She discovered, upon entering the dining room, that several of the cards had been moved. Her own card, Her Grace, the Duchess of Ashworth, had been placed at the far end of the table, near the younger guests and the less significant names. The seat at James's right hand, which was hers by every convention that governed an English dinner table, now bore a different card. Violet Hartley's card. Cecilia stood at the entrance to the dining room for a moment. Around her, guests were finding their places, the gentle shuffle and murmur of people locating their names, the scrape of chairs, the settling of silk. A few people had already noticed the change. She could see it in the careful way they were not looking at her. Lady Harrington caught her eye from across the table. Her expression said, very clearly, "What do you want me to do?" Cecilia gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. She found her reassigned seat. She sat down. She unfolded her napkin with the same unhurried precision she brought to everything, and she turned to the gentleman on her left, a pleasant, elderly baron with an enthusiasm for crop rotation, and she asked him how his spring planting had gone. She was aware, from the corner of her eye, of James at the head of the table. He was laughing at something Violet had said. He had not looked towards Cecilia's end of the table once. She ate her soup. She discussed crop rotation. She asked after the Baron's daughter, who had recently become engaged to a young man in Shropshire, and she listened to the answer with genuine attention because the Baron was a kind man, and his happiness for his daughter was real and uncomplicated, and Cecilia found, tonight of all nights, that she had very little patience for anything that was not real. It was during the fish course that Violet made her mistake. The conversation at the head of the table had grown louder. Violet was a natural performer, Cecilia observed, the kind of woman who expanded to fill whatever space she was given. She was telling a story, something about a house party in Bath, and she was telling it well, and the guests around her were laughing with the slightly heightened brightness of people who are aware they are witnessing something significant and have not yet decided how to feel about it. Then Lord Ashby, 60 years old, one of James's oldest friends, a man who had known the Hartwell family since before Cecilia was born, leaned forward from his place midway down the table and said, in the carrying voice of a man slightly deaf in one ear, "Miss Hartley, I wonder, are you acquainted with the Duchesses' family? The Hartwells have property not far from Bath, I believe." A small, curious silence. Violet turned toward Lord Ashby with her bright, practiced smile. "I'm afraid I don't know the family," she said. And this was the mistake, this precise moment, this small unnecessary addition that Cecilia would think about afterward and understand as the turning point, Violet added, "Though I understand the Hartwell estate is rather modest. One hears things." She said it lightly, almost carelessly, the tone of a woman establishing gently that she knew the landscape she had entered. The silence that followed was of a different quality entirely. Lord Ashby's face did something complicated. Several other faces did the same, because Lord Ashby knew, as did Lady Harrington and old Mr. Peveril at the far end, and at least 4 other people at this table, that the Hartwell estate in Gloucestershire was not modest at all, that its apparent modesty had always been a matter of deliberate discretion on the part of Cecilia's father, that the Coles surveys alone. But that was not what made it a mistake. What made it a mistake was simpler than that. Cecilia's mother had grown up in Bath, had been beloved in Bath, had died 6 years ago, mourned genuinely by half the county, and the Hartwell name, modest or otherwise, was a name that the people in this room had known for 30 years. Violet Hartley had just dismissed it at a dinner table, in front of witnesses. In front of Cecilia. Cecilia set down her fish fork. She did it quietly. She picked up her wine glass. She took a small sip. She was aware that at least a dozen pairs of eyes had moved to her face, waiting. She looked down the table at Violet. Not with anger. Anger would have been easier for everyone. Anger could be dismissed, managed, used against her. What Cecilia felt, looking at Violet Hartley and her mother's necklace at her mother's dinner table, was something colder and more precise than anger. It was the feeling of a door closing. "The Hartwell estate," Cecilia said, in a voice pitched perfectly to carry without appearing to try, "has been in my family for 140 years. My great-grandmother planted the East Garden. My mother was born in the Blue Room on the 2nd floor." She paused. "But you're quite right that we were never ones for display. My father always felt that a family's worth was better demonstrated than announced." The table was very quiet. "A philosophy," Lord Ashby said, in a tone of absolute deliberate clarity, "that speaks well of them." Several heads nodded. The Baron beside Cecilia made a sound of agreement. Lady Harrington lifted her wine glass with the particular deliberateness of a woman casting a vote. Violet's smile had not disappeared, she was too practiced for that. But it had changed. It was thinner now, working harder, aware that something had shifted in the room's invisible architecture. James, at the head of the table, had gone still. He was looking at Cecilia. She did not look back. She turned to the Baron and resumed their conversation about his daughter's engagement in Shropshire, and she was warm and interested and entirely present, and she did not look at James once for the remainder of dinner. But she felt his eyes on her. She felt the particular quality of his attention, different from anything he had directed at her in months, perhaps years. The attention of a man who has just noticed, for the first time, that something he assumed was stationary has been moving. It was after dinner, in the brief interval before the guests moved to the music room, that James found her again. He did not reach for her arm this time. He stood beside her at the window that overlooked the dark garden, the window where she had stood so many evenings alone, watching the ground she managed and loved, and had come to think of as hers in a way they had never been his, and he was quiet for a moment before he spoke. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I beg your pardon. At dinner, you made her look." "I answered a question about my family," Cecilia said, accurately. "Cecilia." "James." She turned to look at him. This close, in the low light from the garden, she could see the lines of his face clearly, older than when she had married him, tired in ways she had once wanted to ask him about and never had. "Your guests are waiting." He looked at her for a long moment. That unreadable expression again. She had spent 3 years trying to read it and had never quite managed. "Why are you still here?" he said, not unkindly, almost genuinely curious. "Why haven't you left? Gone to your aunt in London, or you could leave, Cecilia. You know I wouldn't stop you." She considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. "I know you wouldn't," she said. She looked at him a moment longer. Then she looked past him, at the dark garden, at the east wing of the house, where her great-grandmother's roses still came up every spring without anyone having to tend them. "This is my house, James," she said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere." She walked toward the music room. Behind her she heard him exhale, a long, slow breath, the sound of a man beginning, at last, to understand that he has made a miscalculation. Good, she thought. Let him think about it tonight. Tomorrow Mr. Finn was coming. Mr. Finn arrived at 9 o'clock in the morning. Not at the servants' entrance this time. Cecilia had sent word the previous evening, a brief note, 3 sentences, delivered by her most trusted housemaid to Mr. Finn's lodgings in the village. And the note had said, among other things, that he was to come to the front door. She was done with back entrances. She had not slept much. She had lain in her narrow bed in the room she now occupied alone, the small guest room at the end of the east corridor, which she had moved to 18 months ago with quiet efficiency and without comment, and which she had made entirely her own, filling it with her books and her correspondence desk, and the small watercolor of her mother that had hung in her childhood bedroom. And she had looked at the ceiling and thought, with the particular clarity that comes at 3 in the morning, about everything that could go wrong. The document was sound. Mr. Finn had had it reviewed by 2 other solicitors, independently, without revealing the names of the parties involved. Both had confirmed the same reading of Clause 14. The language was unambiguous. Her father, it turned out, had paid considerably for that unambiguity. The witnesses were sound. Lord Ashby had been present for the announcement. So had Lady Harrington and Mr. Peveril and at least a dozen others of sufficient social standing to satisfy any legal definition of * witnesses of social standing. They had all heard James introduce Violet Hartley as the Lady of Ashworth Hall, in his own voice, in his own home, in front of his own wife. The legal foundation was solid. What she could not fully account for was James. Not his anger. She had considered his anger carefully and concluded that it would be manageable. James expressed anger through coldness and withdrawal, not violence. He was, whatever his failures, not a man who frightened her physically. She knew how to manage his coldness. She had been managing it for years. What she could not account for was the other thing, The thing she had seen in his face twice last night at the window and briefly at dinner, when she had spoken about her family in that quiet, carrying voice. Something she had not seen before, or not seen clearly, or perhaps had seen and talked herself out of believing. She did not want to think about it too carefully. Not yet, not today. Today was for the document. Mr. Fenn came in from the morning cold with his leather folder under his arm and his hat in his hand, and the expression of a man who has been waiting a long time to do something, and is relieved at last to be doing it. He had known her father for 40 years. He had attended Cecilia's christening. He had, she suspected, loved the Hartwell family in the quiet, undemonstrative way of a man whose entire professional life had been spent protecting people he was not permitted to love openly. She received him in the formal parlor, not the small sitting room. The formal parlor, with its high ceilings and its tall windows and its view of the front drive, where James's carriage stood in the morning light. She had chosen the room deliberately. Everything today was deliberate. "Is he in the house?" Mr. Fenn asked, setting his folder on the table. "He is in the study," Cecilia said. "I've asked Hargrove to let him know I require his presence here at 9:30. Mr. Fenn nodded. He opened the folder. He laid out the document with the care of a man handling something he has tended for years, and Cecilia saw for the first time that there were 2 copies. She had known there was one. She had not known about the second. "Your father had the duplicate made in the first year of your marriage," Mr. Fenn said, without looking up. "He asked me to keep it separately, in case James disputed the first. In case of a great many things." Mr. Fenn looked up at her then, and his eyes, pale, tired, very steady, held something she recognized as grief, old and well-managed. He did not expect this outcome, you understand. He hoped, but he prepared. "He always prepared," Cecilia said. "Yes." She looked at the document on the table. The Hartwell name at the top in her father's solicitor's careful hand. The Duke's signature at the bottom, not James's signature. His father's. The previous Duke, who had made this arrangement and sealed it and apparently never mentioned Clause 14 to his son. Did the previous Duke understand what he was signing? She asked. He understood completely, Mr. Fenn said. He was, in his way, a more honorable man than his son has proven to be. He believed the clause would never be necessary. A pause. He also believed his son would not be a fool. The door opened. James came in with the expression of a man who has not slept and is managing it poorly. He was dressed, but only just, his cravat not quite right, his hair not entirely settled. He stopped in the doorway when he saw Mr. Fenn. His eyes moved to the document on the table. Something in his face changed. Not dramatically. James was not a dramatic man, but Cecilia had spent 3 years learning the small language of his expressions, the slight tightening at the jaw, the almost imperceptible stillness that came over him when something surprised him, and she could read it clearly. He had not known about the document, or rather, he had known, in some vague, inherited way, that his father had made certain arrangements. He had not known the specifics of Clause 14. He had not known that it had been activated last night, in front of 200 witnesses, the moment he had opened his mouth on that staircase. He looked at Cecilia. "What is this?" "Please sit down, James," she said. He did not sit. He came into the room and stood on the other side of the table, and Mr. Fenn, without being asked, began to read. He read the relevant sections in full. He read them clearly, without comment, in the measured voice of a man who has rehearsed this and feels no need to add emphasis because the words themselves are sufficient. He read Clause 14 twice, once at James's request, the second time because James had gone very still halfway through the first reading, and Mr. Fenn had judged correctly that he had not absorbed it. When Mr. Fenn finished, the room was quiet. Outside, a carriage was coming up the front drive. A blackbird was singing somewhere in the east garden. The morning light had shifted while Mr. Fenn was reading, and now it came through the tall windows at a lower angle, catching the dust in the air and the silver of the document's border and the ruby of the ring on Cecilia's hand, which she had not removed. James looked at the ring, then at Cecilia. "This is not enforceable," he said. His voice was controlled. She gave him credit for that. "It is entirely enforceable," Mr. Fenn said, with the calm of a man who has anticipated this response. "I have had it reviewed independently on 3 separate occasions. I am prepared to provide you with those opinions in writing." My father signed it willingly and in full understanding of its contents. Mr. Fenn folded his hands on the table, as I have already indicated. James looked at Cecilia again. She met his gaze steadily. She had prepared for anger, for coldness, for the withdrawal she knew so well. She had not fully prepared for what she saw instead, a look she recognized with a sharp and unwelcome pang from the early months of their marriage. A look that was almost. "Cecilia," he said quietly, just her name. She made herself hold his gaze. "The Gloucestershire estate," Mr. Fenn continued, with the precise timing of a man who understood that now was not the moment for silence, would revert to her Grace's sole ownership and management. The cleared debt, £11,000, would be treated as recovered. There is also the matter of the coal surveys, which your father was made aware of in the 3rd year of his tenure, and which— "The coal surveys," James repeated. Something shifted in his face. He knew about the coal. "Her Grace's father surveyed the eastern fields in 1809, Mr. Fenn said. "The value of those deposits is considerable. Your father was informed. It was one of the reasons the settlement was considered generous." James sat down. Not in the way of a man choosing to sit, in the way of a man whose legs have made the decision for him. He put his hands on the table, large, familiar hands that Cecilia had once, in another life entirely, reached for without thinking. And he looked at the document, and then at the window, and then at nothing in particular. "How long have you known?" he said, not to Mr. Fenn, to Cecilia. 14 months, she said. He absorbed that. She watched him absorb it, the full weight of it, what it meant, the dinners and the evenings and the long silences of the past 14 months rearranging themselves in his memory. "You said nothing," he said. "You gave me no reason to." The words landed in the room without drama. They did not need drama. They were simply true, and they both knew it, and the knowing of it sat between them like something solid and cold. James looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Mr. Fenn. "I would like," he said carefully, "to speak with my wife alone." Mr. Fenn looked at Cecilia. She considered it. The document was on the table. The duplicate was in Mr. Fenn's folder. The witnesses existed, independent of anything James might say to her in this room. She was not afraid of being alone with him. "Give us a few minutes, Mr. Fenn," she said. Mr. Fenn gathered his folder, leaving the document on the table, and walked to the door with the unhurried dignity of a man who has spent 40 years knowing when to leave a room. The door closed behind him with a soft, definitive click. The morning light, the blackbird, the document between them. James looked at his wife. "I didn't know about the coal," he said. It came out differently than she expected, not as a defense, not as an accusation, almost as though he was thinking aloud. "I know," she said. "Your father," he stopped, tried again, "he protected you." "Yes," Cecilia said, "he did." Something moved across James's face, then, complex and unguarded in a way she had rarely seen from him. Something that might have been grief or shame or the particular devastation of a man who has just understood, clearly and too late, the full shape of what he threw away. She did not let herself feel it, not yet, not here. "What do you want?" he said. And Cecilia, who had thought about this question for 14 months, who had rehearsed her answer in the small bedroom at the end of the east corridor on many long, quiet nights, looked at her husband across the table and said, "I want you to listen." She had expected him to begin with denial. That was how James operated. She had learned this in the first year of their marriage, before she had learned most of the other things. When cornered, he retreated first into the position that the thing being discussed was not quite real, not quite as serious as presented, not quite what it appeared to be. It was not dishonesty, exactly. It was more like a reflex, the instinct of a man who had moved through life with sufficient privilege that most problems, if not acknowledged immediately, had a tendency to resolve themselves without his intervention. He had lived, she understood now, in a world that confirmed this instinct at every turn. But he did not begin with denial this time. He began instead with Violet. "She's not," he stopped, pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose in a gesture she recognized, the gesture he made when he was trying to find the right words and finding the wrong ones instead. "What you saw last night, what everyone saw, I want you to understand that it was not intended to. James, to humiliate you. That was not my intention. I handled it badly, I can see that now, but if you would allow me to explain the—" "James." He stopped. "I know what your intentions were," Cecilia said. "I have known for quite some time what your intentions were. I am not interested in your intentions." He looked at her steadily. "Then what are you interested in?" "The consequences," she said, "which is what that document represents." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the blackbird had stopped singing. The morning had shifted into that particular mid-morning stillness that Cecilia associated with the house at its most itself, before the servants were fully occupied, before the day had gathered its noise and motion. "If I contest it," he said. "You cannot contest it. Mr. Fenn has already explained." "Legally, perhaps not, but there are other ways to contest things." He said it without threat, which was almost worse. "My family has considerable influence with—" "Your family's considerable influence," Cecilia said, "rests in part on the financial stability that my father's money provided, which is precisely what the document addresses." He absorbed this. "The coal," he said again quietly. Not for her benefit, he was thinking. "Yes." "How much?" She named a figure. She watched his face very carefully as she said it, and what she saw there was not greed, she had prepared herself for greed, had thought she would find it there easily, but something more complicated. Something that looked uncomfortably like respect. "Your father," James said slowly, was a remarkable man." "He was," Cecilia agreed. "I spent most of my childhood wishing he would tell me so himself. He was not a demonstrative man, but yes." A pause. Something in the room had shifted slightly. She could feel it. The almost imperceptible change in the quality of the air between them. The way a conversation changes when both people stop performing and begin, cautiously, to speak. She did not trust it, not yet. "I could make this very difficult for you," James said. He said it in the same tone he might use to discuss the weather, not with menace, but with the flat honesty of a man stating a fact he wishes were not true. "You could try," Cecilia said. "The courts would require witnesses to testify to last night's events. Would you like me to compile a list of who was present?" He was quiet. "There are also," she continued, "the letters." He looked up sharply. "I'm not speaking of love letters," she said. "I don't have those and I wouldn't use them if I did. I'm speaking of your correspondence with Miss Hartley's father. The arrangement you made with him regarding I believe the phrase used was future financial consideration, in exchange for his cooperation in the matter of his daughter's position in this household." James had gone very still. "You paid him," Cecilia said, "not as an accusation, as a statement of record. Mr. Hartley agreed to his daughter's arrangement in exchange for a sum that I believe represents approximately 1/3 of your annual income. The letters are dated. They are also, I should mention, in a location entirely separate from this house. The stillness in James was absolute now. She had only seen him like this once before, the day his father died, standing in the hallway of this house, before he had collected himself enough to speak. "How," he said. "I manage this household, James," she said quietly. "I have managed it for 3 years. The correspondence that passes through it, all of it, passes through my awareness. I did not go looking for those letters. I found them because I find everything. Because finding things is what I do, and you never once thought to notice." He put both hands flat on the table. He looked at them for a moment. Then he looked at her. "What do you want?" he said again. The same question as before, but it meant something different now. Before, it had been the question of a man assessing the terms of a negotiation. Now it was something else. Rower, more lost. "I told you," she said. "I want you to listen." "I am listening." "Then stop calculating," she said. "I can see you calculating. You're thinking about which solicitor to call and whether Lord Ashby can be persuaded and what story will play best in the drawing rooms next season. Stop. I'm not asking you to surrender. I'm asking you to listen to me speak." He looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly something in his posture changed. The calculation did not disappear entirely. She did not expect it to, but it receded. He was still. He was looking at her. "All right," he said. She had rehearsed this. In the small bedroom on the long nights, she had gone over it many times, the words, the order, the tone. She had wanted it to be clear and without sentiment, a precise account of the past 3 years as she had experienced them. She had wanted to be like her father, contained, purposeful, without display. She found, sitting across from James in the morning light with the document between them, that the rehearsed version would not come. What came instead was simpler, and, she suspected, more honest. "I tried," she said. "I want you to know that. I am not certain you will believe me, but I want to say it plainly. I tried to make this marriage into something worth having. Not because I was obliged to, because I wanted to." He said nothing. He was watching her face in a way that made her uncomfortable, too close, too careful, the way he had looked at her in the early months, before Violet, before the slow withdrawal that had preceded Violet. "I understood what the arrangement was," she continued. "I was not naive about it. My father explained the terms, and I understood that affection was not guaranteed, and I accepted that. But I believed that two people of reasonable character, living in proximity with common interests and mutual respect, could build something genuine over time. I have seen it done. My parents managed it." She paused. "I gave you 3 years," she said. "I ran your house. I managed your finances, better than you know and better than you will perhaps acknowledge, but I know, and Mr. Finn knows, and the accounts will show it. I learned the names of your friends' wives and children, and I remembered their birthdays, and I hosted their dinners, and I was, every single day, exactly the woman this house required." "I know," James said. His voice was strange, low, a little rough at the edges. "And you walked past me," she said. "Every day you walked past me as though I was part of the furniture, as though I was the house itself, useful, reliable, not requiring attention." "Cecilia, I am not finished." He closed his mouth. "Last night," she said, "you stood on that staircase and you introduced another woman by my name, in my house, in front of everyone I have spent 3 years learning to manage and host and represent with credit to your family. And I want you to understand something, James." She leaned forward slightly. "I am not standing here because I am devastated. I am not weeping, and I am not asking you to love me, and I am not going to tell you that you have broken my heart, because I stopped leaving my heart in positions where it could be broken by you some time ago." Something crossed his face at that, quick and painful, but she continued. I am here because this is my house, and my family's name is in that document, and my mother's necklace is currently around another woman's neck, and I have decided clearly, calmly, after 14 months of consideration that I have absorbed enough. That is all. Not heartbreak. Enough. The room was very quiet. That's all, James said slowly. Something in his tone she could not interpret. Yes. Not, he stopped, pressed his fingers to his mouth briefly, a gesture she didn't recognize, and then looked at her with an expression she had genuinely never seen on him before. Not calculation, not charm, not even the weary guilt of the night before. Something open and unguarded, and she thought frightened. I told myself, he said, that you didn't mind, that you were content, that you had your household and your accounts and your position, and that was sufficient, that you had never expected more, and therefore I was not taking anything from you by. I know what you told yourself, Cecilia said. I was wrong, he said. The words landed very quietly. She had not expected them. She had prepared for many things, for threats, for negotiation, for the cold withdrawal, for charm deployed as a weapon, but not for this. Not for I was wrong said without qualification, without the immediate pivot to explanation, without anything after it at all. She looked at him across the table. Yes, she said, you were. The silence stretched. It was not the silence of an ending. That was what unnerved her. She had expected by this point in the conversation that the shape of what came next would be clear. Either he would capitulate to her terms or he would fight them, and in either case the path forward would be visible. She had mapped the paths. She had prepared for each of them. She had not prepared for a silence that felt like something else entirely. Vivienne. He used her surname so rarely that it took Cecilia a moment to understand he meant Violet. It is not what you think, what everyone thinks. I don't think anything, Cecilia said carefully. I know what I observed. She was, he exhaled. There was a period, yes, but it has not been, for some months it has not been what it was. I handled last night badly. Badly doesn't cover it. I had promised her. I had made implications that I should not have made, and last night I was trying to satisfy a situation I had created and should not have created, and I made it catastrophically worse, and... James. He stopped. Why are you telling me this? She said. He looked at her. For a long moment he simply looked at her, and she felt, with something that was not quite alarm but was adjacent to it, that whatever he was about to say had not been rehearsed, that he was arriving at it in real time here in front of her without preparation. Because, he said, I am trying to tell you that it is over, that it has been over in all the ways that matter for some months, and I am aware that I have no right to say that in a tone that expects anything from you, but I am saying it because I would like you to know. Cecilia looked at the document on the table. She looked at the ring on her hand. She thought about 14 months of careful, solitary preparation, the nights in the small bedroom, the rehearsed words that had not come, her father's careful hand on the page of a document written 12 years ago to protect a daughter he could not protect in any other way. She thought about the early months of this marriage, the 4 months she had believed in. She thought about Violet Hartley wearing her mother's necklace. The necklace, she said. He blinked. I beg your pardon. My mother's necklace. Violet was wearing it last night. It was in my jewelry case. You gave it to her. Something happened in James's face that she had not seen before, genuine, unguarded shame. Not the managed variety. Real. I didn't know, he said. I didn't know it was your mother's. It was in a case with the other pieces, and I thought, he stopped. That is not an excuse. I should have known. I should have asked. No, Cecilia said quietly. You shouldn't have been in my jewelry case at all. The shame deepened. She watched it. She did not relish it, which surprised her a little. She had thought in the long rehearsals that there would be some satisfaction in seeing him understand the full weight of what he had done. There was none. It was just painful. Being right, she thought, was not the same as being well. "Tell me what you want," he said, for the third time. But it was a different question now. She could hear it clearly. The first time had been tactical. The second had been lost. This time it was something else. This time it was a man asking because he genuinely did not know the answer and understood, perhaps for the first time, that he should. She was quiet for a moment. "Violet leaves," she said. Not with accusations, not with spectacle. Quietly. "She is given what is fair. I am not cruel, James, whatever you may have come to think of me, but she leaves this house and she does not return to it." "Yes," he said. "The Gloucestershire estate is transferred to my name. The Coles surveys and all related documentation come to me. This is not negotiable." "I understand. Mr. Fenn will oversee the transfer. I trust him. I do not require you to be present for it." "All right." She paused. He was watching her, still with that open, unguarded expression that she didn't quite know what to do with. "There is one more thing," she said. "Name it." "Tonight," she said, "before Mr. Fenn leaves, I want you to acknowledge in front of him, in writing if he requires it, that the events of last evening constituted a public violation as described in the settlement. Not because I need the legal protection. The document already provides it, but because I want you to say it, out loud, in front of a witness." His jaw tightened slightly. This was the one that cost him. She had known it would. James was a proud man. The pride was, she had always thought, his most consistent feature. It had never been cruelty that drove him. It had been pride, the assumption that his world would arrange itself around him because it always had. "You want me to say that I wronged you," he said. "Yes," Cecilia said. "That is what I want." The silence this time was different. It had weight to it, the weight of something being decided, something that once decided could not be undecided. She waited. She was good at waiting. "All right," James said at last. She stood. She smoothed her skirt. The gesture was automatic, something she did when a thing was concluded. She moved toward the door. "Cecilia." She stopped, did not turn around. "The ring," he said. "You're still wearing it." She looked down at her hand. The ruby, dark as old wine, 4 generations. Her wedding day 3 years ago in this very house. She thought about taking it off. She had thought about it all night, all morning, through every minute of this conversation. She had imagined the gesture clean, definitive, the ring placed on the table beside the document, the walk out the door, the clarity of it. She closed her fingers around it, gently. "I'll decide," she said, "when I'm ready." She opened the door. Mr. Fenn was waiting in the corridor, his folder under his arm, his expression as patient and steady as it had been for 40 years. "Mr. Fenn," she said, "please come back in. The Duke has something to say." The week after the document was signed was the quietest week Ashworth Hall had known in years. Violet left on a Thursday morning. Cecilia had not watched from the window. She had decided that deliberately, had chosen instead to be in the East Garden when the carriage came, deadheading the late roses her great-grandmother had planted in soil that now, legally, irrevocably, belonged to her. She had worn old gloves and taken her time, and she had listened to the carriage wheels on the gravel and the sound of luggage being loaded, and the particular silence that follows a departure, and she had felt, not triumph, not relief, not the clean satisfaction she had anticipated for 14 months. She had felt tired. Profoundly, honestly tired. The kind of tired that arrives only after the thing you have been bracing for has finally passed, and your body understands at last that it is permitted to put down what it has been carrying. She clipped a spent bloom from a branch that had been her great-grandmother's, and she let herself be tired, and she did not perform anything for anyone. James had been, since the morning of the document, a presence she did not quite know how to account for. He had done what he said he would do. She had to give him that. She had prepared herself to fight for every concession, had expected resistance, delay, the slow erosion of agreements made in a moment of shock. It had not happened. Violet had been spoken to, she gathered, that same day. The transfer of the Gloucestershire estate had been initiated within 48 hours, Mr. Fenn overseeing with quiet efficiency. The cold documentation had been delivered to her correspondence desk in a neat folder, without comment. And James had said the words, standing in the formal parlor in front of Mr. Fenn, in a voice that did not waver, "I publicly and demonstrably violated my wife's dignity and standing. The events of the evening of the 14th constituted a breach of the settlement as described in Clause 14. I acknowledge this freely and without condition." Mr. Fenn had written it down. James had signed it. Cecilia had stood by the window and looked at the garden, and felt the words settle into the room like something finally coming to rest. But that had been a week ago, and since then James had been present, quietly, carefully, without apparent agenda. He took his meals at the usual times. He attended to his correspondence. He had ridden out twice to the home farm, which he had not done in months. He had not sought her out for conversation, but neither had he avoided her. They had passed in corridors, sat at opposite ends of the dinner table with only Cecilia's invited guest for company, exchanged the small necessary communications of two people sharing a large house. He was polite, attentive in the way he had not been for 2 years. It unsettled her more than his absence had. It was Lord Ashby who brought it to a point. He came to call on a Friday afternoon, ostensibly to return a book he had borrowed from the Ashworth Library some months prior. He was shown to the morning room where Cecilia was working on correspondence, and he sat in the chair by the fire and accepted tea, and talked for 20 minutes about his grandchildren and the state of the roads in the county. And Cecilia answered and poured and waited, because she had known Lord Ashby for 3 years, and she understood that he always arrived at the thing he had come to say eventually. "You've managed it well," he said at last, setting down his cup, looking at her directly the way old men with clear consciences tended to. "Better than anyone expected, better than he deserved, frankly." "I managed it the way my father would have," Cecilia said. "Yes," Lord Ashby was quiet for a moment. "Your father was a good man. I miss him." He looked at the fire. "He worried about you, you know, after the marriage. He never said so directly, not his way, but I saw it, when he came to visit that first year." Cecilia set down her pen. "He came once," she said, "that Christmas." "He came 3 times, Lord Ashby said. "The other 2 he didn't announce himself. He drove out from the village, looked at the house, and drove back." A pause. "I happened to see him on one of those occasions. He told me he simply wanted to be sure you were all right, that if you needed him, he wanted to be nearby." Cecilia looked at the window. The afternoon light was pale and thin, the particular light of early November, when everything in England seems to be held at a careful distance. "He never told me," she said. "No," said Lord Ashby, "but he left you the document." She was quiet for a moment, pressing her fingertips against the edge of her correspondence paper. "What has James said to you?" she asked, because Lord Ashby had not come about a book and they both knew it. Lord Ashby considered his answer with the care of an old man who has learned that the truth is usually worth saying, but benefits from being said precisely. "He came to see me yesterday," he said. I think he wanted someone to tell him whether he had any right to hope." "Hope," Cecilia repeated. "Those were his words, whether he had any right to it." Lord Ashby looked at her steadily. "I told him I had no idea, that it was not my hope to grant or withhold, that the only person equipped to answer that question was the one he had consistently failed to ask." Cecilia looked at the fire. "He has not asked me," she said. "No," said Lord Ashby. "I don't think he knows how. He has spent his entire life in rooms where he never needed to ask for anything." That evening, after Lord Ashby had gone, Cecilia sat at her correspondence desk for a long time without writing anything. She thought about what Lord Ashby had said. She thought about her father driving out from the village and looking at the house and driving back, 3 times, without announcing himself. She thought about a document drafted in the first year of her marriage, the duplicate made in case, the careful provision of a man who could not say "I love you" directly but could spend 40 years making sure that, when it mattered, the mechanism was in place. She thought about James standing in the parlor, saying "I was wrong" with no qualification and no pivot. She thought about the 4 months, at the beginning when she had believed. She picked up the ring. She had taken it off that afternoon, finally, in the garden, alone, slipping it from her finger and holding it in her palm and looking at it for a long time. It had felt lighter than she expected. The absence on her hand felt larger. She turned it over in her fingers now at her desk. The ruby caught the candlelight, dark as old wine, 4 generations. She put it in the small drawer of her correspondence desk, closed the drawer, left it there. Then she took out a fresh sheet of paper and wrote a note, brief, direct, in her neat, unhurried hand. She folded it and rang for the housemaid and asked her to deliver it to the Duke's study. The note said, "I will be in the library after dinner if you wish to speak." She did not sign it, he would know. He came at 8:30. She was reading or holding a book and not reading, which was a thing she had done rather a lot this week, when she heard his step in the corridor. She recognized it. 3 years of a shared house meant she knew the sound of him moving through it, the particular rhythm of his walk, different from every other person in the building. He knocked, which he had never done before. Not once in 3 years had James knocked at a door of his own house. "Come in," she said. He came in. He looked, she thought, like a man who had made a decision about something and was not entirely certain it was the right one but had made it anyway. He was dressed for the evening. He had been to the home farm that day and had clearly changed for dinner, and he was carrying nothing, his hands free in the way that made a person look either very relaxed or very exposed. James looked exposed. He stood a few feet inside the door. "Thank you for the note," he said. "Sit down, James." He sat. Not across the room, he chose the chair nearest the fireplace, near where she was sitting, close enough that they could speak quietly. She noticed this and did not comment on it. "Lord Ashby came today," she said. James looked at the fire. "I suspected he might." "He told me you went to see him." "Yes." "He told me what you asked him." James was quiet. He was looking at the fire with the expression of a man reviewing whether he wishes to be having this conversation, and concluding, she thought, that he does. That he has, in fact, been waiting for it. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. "I'm aware of that. I've been trying to find there are no right words for what I did. I have looked for them this week and they don't exist, and I think perhaps the absence of them is the honest answer." "What do you mean?" He looked at her then. "I mean that what I did cannot be made right with language. I introduced another woman by your name in your own house. I gave her your mother's necklace. He stopped, exhaled. "I am not a man who finds this easy, saying these things. I was not raised to, my father didn't." Another stop. "I know," Cecilia said. "That is not an excuse." "No," she agreed, "but it is a fact." He looked at her with something that might have been gratitude, though it seemed to embarrass him. "I treated you," he said carefully, "as though you were the house, as though you were a fixed feature of a life I didn't think needed tending because it was already standing. I walked past you every day for 3 years and he pressed his mouth together briefly. "I noticed you. I want you to know that. I noticed more than I gave any appearance of noticing. I simply told myself that you were content because it was easier than asking whether you were." Cecilia looked at him steadily. "And if you had asked?" "You would have told me the truth," he said. "That's what I was afraid of." The fire shifted. A log settled with a soft collapse of sound. "I don't know what to do with that, James," she said honestly. "I appreciate you saying it, but I don't know yet what to do with it." "I'm not asking you to do anything with it," he said. "I'm not asking for, I came here tonight because you invited me, and because I wanted to say these things, not because I expect anything from them." He looked at his hands. "Lord Ashby told me I had no right to hope. I think that's probably correct." "Lord Ashby told you he didn't know," Cecilia said. James looked up. "He told you he had no idea," she said. "That it wasn't his to grant or withhold. Those are different things from having no right." The silence that followed was careful on both sides. "I need to ask you something," Cecilia said. "And I need you to answer me honestly, without calculation, without thinking about what answer serves you best. Can you do that?" "I will try," he said, which was, she thought, a more honest answer than yes. "Violet," she said, "not whether it is over, I believe you that it is over, but what was it? What were you looking for?" He was quiet for a long moment. She watched him genuinely consider the question, watched him resist the first 2 or 3 answers that came to him. She could see him resist them and arrive at something further down. "Ease," he said at last. She was easy. Everything with her was light, uncomplicated. She laughed at everything and wanted nothing serious, and I could be in a room with her without feeling that I was failing at something. "And with me," Cecilia said, "you felt you were failing." "With you," he said, "I felt yes. I felt that you saw me very clearly and that what you saw was not what I would have chosen for you to see." He looked at the fire. "It is easier to be with someone who does not see you clearly, who believes the version you present." "That's very honest," Cecilia said. "You asked for honesty." "I did," she was quiet. "And the seeing clearly, does that still frighten you?" He looked at her. "Yes," he said, "but I think I've been more frightened this week of the alternative, of what this house felt like when I genuinely understood, for the first time, that you might leave it, that I might have made it impossible for you to stay." "You came close," she said. "I know. Closer than you realize," she said. "There were nights, James, many nights, when I had the bags mentally packed and the route to my aunt's house in London memorized, and the only thing keeping me in that small bedroom at the end of the East Corridor was—" She stopped. "Was what?" he said. She looked at the fire for a moment. "The garden," she said. "My great-grandmother's roses. The coal fields my father never told anyone about. The 140 years of my family in this county." A pause. "And if I am being fully honest, some small remaining belief that you were not beyond retrieving, that the man I saw occasionally in unguarded moments was the real one, that the rest was accumulation, habit, cowardice." "That's a generous interpretation," James said quietly. "It's an honest one," she said. "I was not feeling generous, I was feeling clear." They sat for a while without speaking. It was not an uncomfortable silence that surprised her. After everything, after the document and the parlor and the week of careful parallel existence, she had expected discomfort. She found instead something that felt, cautiously, like 2 people in the same room for the first time. Actually in it, actually present, not performing the fact of being in it. "The Gloucestershire estate," James said eventually. "I'd like to see it. The coal fields, I'd like to understand what your father built there." "It will be mine," she said. "The transfer is already in progress." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking to reclaim it. I'm asking if you were willing, whether you would show it to me, whether you would tell me about it." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because it is yours," he said simply. "Because it was your father's, and it is part of who you are, and I have spent 3 years in close proximity to you without knowing who you are, and I would like, if you would permit it, to begin to know." Cecilia looked at the drawer of her correspondence desk, across the room, the drawer where she had put the ring that afternoon. "That is a very large if," she said. "Yes," he said, "I know. I am not the woman I was 3 years ago," she said. "I am not going to be patient in the way I was patient. I am not going to manage things quietly and hope you notice. If we are going to try to build something, it will be on different terms than before." "I would expect nothing less," he said. "Don't say that as though it's easy," she said. "It won't be easy. I see you clearly, James. I told you that and I meant it. I am going to go on seeing you clearly, and occasionally it is going to be uncomfortable for both of us." "Good," he said. And then, at her expression, "I mean it. Violet was easy and look what it cost me. I have come to think this week that being seen clearly by someone who remains anyway is worth considerably more than being unseen comfortably." Cecilia was quiet. "Remains anyway," she repeated. "I'm not assuming," he said quickly. I don't take it as given. I'm saying that if you remained, it would be worth more to me than anything I have thrown away this year. That is all I'm saying." She looked at him for a long time. The fire, his hands, his face, older and more honest than she had ever seen it, stripped of the performance she had spent 3 years watching. "I am going to Gloucestershire next week," she said finally, "to see the estate, to meet with the land agents and review the coal surveys." He said nothing, waiting. "You may come," she said, "if you wish, as my guest on my terms." Something moved across his face. She recognized it now, this expression she had been trying to name for a week. It was the expression of a man who has been braced for a door to close and felt it stay open. "On your terms," he said. "Entirely," she said. "Yes," he said, "I wish." She did not give him the ring that night. She had thought about it sitting in the library after he had gone, the house quiet around her, the fire burning low. She had gone to the desk and opened the drawer and looked at it for a long time. The ruby, dark as old wine, 4 generations. She closed the drawer again. It was not the right moment. She would know the right moment when it came, the same way she had known, 14 months ago, that the time had come to write to Mr. Fenn. Something in her was very good at knowing. She had spent years not trusting it. She trusted it now. She went to the window and looked out at the dark garden, at the east wing, at the place where her great-grandmother's roses would come up again in spring, without anyone having to tell them to. At the house that was hers, that had her family's name in its foundation in a way that no carriage departure could alter. She put her hand flat on the cold glass. All right, she thought, all right. Not a surrender, not an ending. A beginning, entered into with open eyes and documented terms, and the full knowledge of what it had cost to get here. That, she decided, was worth more than any easy beginning had ever been. The roses came up early that spring. Cecilia noticed them on a Tuesday morning in late March, coming in from her walk along the east garden wall, small, determined buds on the oldest canes, the ones that needed no encouragement, the ones that had been coming up since before anyone currently living had been born. She stopped and looked at them for a moment in the pale morning light, her hands in her old gloves, the cold still in the air but something else in it too, something that had been absent for a long time. She was happy. She took a moment to recognize it, the way you take a moment to recognize a face you haven't seen in years, turned it over carefully, checked it for the anxiety that had so often accompanied it in the past, the waiting for the other shoe, the careful management of hope, the habit of bracing. She found, somewhat to her own surprise, that the anxiety was not there, or not in the old form. What remained was something more honest, a clear-eyed contentment, arrived at through difficulty, which felt considerably more solid than anything that had come easily. She clipped a dead cane from the oldest rose bush, dropped it in the basket. Behind her, from the direction of the house, she heard the front door. Gloucestershire had changed everything. She had not expected that. She had expected the trip to be useful, clarifying, a matter of practical business conducted in the company of a man she was cautiously reassessing. She had not expected James in the coal fields. He had been extraordinary. Not in the way of a man performing interest for her benefit. She would have seen through that immediately, and he had known it, and so he hadn't tried. He had been genuinely, almost boyishly absorbed. He had asked the land agents questions she hadn't thought to ask. He had walked the eastern boundary in the rain without complaint, reading the survey documents her father had left, and at one point he had stopped in the middle of a muddy field and looked at the horizon and said quietly, "Your father saw all of this," and she had said yes, and he had said, "I wish I had known him better," and she had believed him. That evening in the sitting room of the Gloucestershire house, her name on the deed, her father's portrait above the fireplace, they had talked until well past midnight. Really talked, in the way she had once believed they might in the optimistic first months of the marriage, about the estate and the coal and what could be built there, about her father and his quiet, careful ways, about James's father, who had been difficult and proud, and had signed a marriage settlement with Clause 14 in it, because some part of him had understood that his son might need it. He was trying to protect you, James had said, meaning her father. They both were, she had said, meaning both fathers. James had looked at her across the fireplace. "I would like to spend a considerable amount of time," he had said, making that unnecessary. She had not answered immediately. She had looked at the fire and thought about it with the seriousness it deserved. Then she had said, "That would require a great deal of sustained effort on your part." "I am aware," he had said, "and considerable patience on mine." "Also aware." "And I will not be managed," she had said. "I will not be walked past. I will not be furniture." "No, he had said, "you will not." She had looked at him for a long moment in the firelight. "All right," she had said, "then we will try." It had not been without difficulty. She had warned him of that, and she had meant it. There had been an evening in June when old habits had surfaced in him, a dinner party, a moment in which he had spoken over her in front of guests with the easy confidence of a man who had done it for years without noticing. She had said nothing in the moment. She had waited until the guests had gone and they were alone in the drawing room, and then she had told him, quietly and precisely, what he had done and why it mattered. He had gone still in the way she had come to recognize, not the defensive stillness of the early months, but the stillness of a man genuinely listening, absorbing, arriving at something uncomfortable about himself. He had apologized without qualification. He had not done it again. There had been a week in August when she had been ill, genuinely ill, the first time in years she had allowed herself to simply be unwell without managing it, and James had rearranged 3 days of business appointments and sat with her in the small bedroom at the end of the east corridor, the one she had moved into alone 18 months ago, and read to her from the books on her shelf. He had not made it a performance. He had simply been there, quietly and without agenda, and she had lain in her narrow bed listening to his voice and thought, "There he is. That is the real one." She had moved back into the main bedroom in September. She had not announced it. She had simply moved her things back, quietly, methodically, the way she did everything, and James had come in that evening and seen the watercolor of her mother back on the wall where it belonged and said nothing, just looked at it for a moment with an expression she did not need to interpret because it was entirely clear. Mr. Finn had retired in October. She had gone to see him at his lodgings in the village, bringing a gift from the Gloucestershire estate, a bottle of wine from the cellar her father had stocked 30 years ago, 2 glasses, and an afternoon. They had sat by his fire and talked about her father and the document and the long, slow years of preparation that had preceded that Tuesday morning when he had appeared at the servant's entrance with his leather folder. He would be pleased, Mr. Finn had said, Not he would be proud, not he would be happy for you, pleased. The precise word her father would have chosen himself. I know, she had said. She had kissed the old man's cheek when she left. He had looked startled, then quietly moved, in the way of someone unaccustomed to demonstrations. She had driven home in the late afternoon light. Through the county her family had been part of for 140 years, past fields she now owned, past the village where her father had driven quietly 3 times to look at a house and make sure his daughter was all right. She had thought, I am all right, Papa. I am considerably better than all right. The footsteps behind her in the garden were familiar now in a different way than they had been a year ago. Not the footsteps of a man she had learned to navigate around. The footsteps of a man she had learned to know. James came up beside her and looked at the roses. Early, he said. They always come up early when the winter hasn't been too hard, she said. My great-grandmother planted these. They know what they're doing. He stood beside her in the cold morning air, his coat not quite enough for the temperature. He was always underdressed in the mornings. She had learned this. It was one of the small, ordinary facts of him she had accumulated over the year. She had stopped finding the ordinary facts unsettling. She had come to find them, in their way, the most valuable thing. Mr. Fenn's replacement sent the final documentation from Gloucestershire, he said. It arrived this morning. Everything is complete. Good, she said. The Eastern Field Survey, the new one, confirms the original estimates. Your father was, if anything, conservative. He usually was, she said. James was quiet for a moment. She could feel him beside her, solid and present and slightly cold in his insufficient coat. She had learned over the past year what his silences meant. This one was the silence of a man who has something to say and is deciding how to say it. She waited. She was still good at waiting, though it felt different now. Not the waiting of a woman bracing. The waiting of a woman who trusts that the thing coming is worth receiving. He reached into his coat pocket. She looked down. In his hand was a ring. Not the Ashworth betrothal ring, she had put that away, and they had both understood without discussing it that it belonged to a chapter that was closed. This was something different. Smaller, simpler, a slim gold band with a single stone, pale as winter light, that she did not immediately recognize. It was my grandmother's, James said. Not the official line, not the pieces that come with the title. It was hers personally. She brought it from her own family when she married into this one. He looked at it in his palm. She was, by all accounts, a woman who did not allow herself to be managed. Cecilia looked at the ring. I am told she once dismissed an earl from her dinner table, James continued, for speaking over her during the fish course. Good for her, Cecilia said. I thought you might feel that way. She looked up at him. He was watching her with the open, unguarded expression she had come to know this year, the one she had first seen in the formal parlor, the one that had no performance in it. I am not going to ask you in a manner that expects a particular answer, he said. I have thought a great deal about how to do this, and I have concluded that the most honest approach is simply to tell you what I want and let you decide. He paused. I want to marry you again. Not the first marriage, not the arrangement, not the settlement, not the version that required a document with a clause 14 to make survivable. Something different. Something that starts here, with everything known between us on your terms, with your name on the deed. My name is already on the deed, she said. Yes, he said, it is. A pause. I am aware that I am not offering you anything you don't already have. The estate is yours. The house, in every way that matters, is yours. I am not in a position to offer security or rescue or any of the things that are supposed to make this speech persuasive. What are you offering then? She said. He thought about it. She appreciated that he thought about it rather than answering immediately, that he took the question seriously. Myself, he said, clearly seen, not the version I present, The real one, the one that has been frightened of being known and is trying, with variable success, to be less so. He looked at the ring in his palm. And this, which has been in my grandmother's case for 40 years waiting for someone worthy of it. The garden was very still, the early roses, the cold light, 140 years of her family in this soil. Cecilia looked at the ring for a long moment. Then she looked at him, at his face, open and exposed and genuinely uncertain in the way she had once thought him incapable of, at his insufficient coat, at the man she had spent 3 years not knowing, and 1 year beginning to know, and a great deal of long, quiet time deciding whether the beginning was worth building on. She thought it was. She thought it was, not in the hopeful, uncritical way of 3 years ago, but in the way of a woman who has stood in a formal parlor and heard a man say I was wrong and watched him mean it, and tested the meaning of it across 12 careful months. She held out her hand. He put the ring on her finger. It fit. She had not expected it to fit so precisely. She registered this as a small private thing, the kind of thing she would think about later in the quiet. She looked at it on her hand. Pale stone, winter light, her great-grandmother's roses coming up behind her without anyone having to tend them. On my terms, she said. On your terms, he said, entirely. She looked up at him. He was smiling, not the charming, social smile she had catalogued in the first year of their marriage, the smile deployed for rooms. This was smaller and less practiced and considerably more real. She had come to prefer the real things. Come inside, she said. You're cold. I'm fine, he said, which was not true, and she knew it, and he knew she knew it, and neither of them minded. She walked back toward the house. He fell into step beside her, not behind her, not ahead of her, beside, level. At the door she paused and looked back once at the garden. The roses, the pale morning, the long east wall that had been there longer than anyone living could remember and would be there, she expected, longer than anyone currently living could imagine. She went inside. The door closed behind them both. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and share your thoughts about the story. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.